So I'm Gareth. I am a digital transformation consultant. Previous to this, I was at Prostate Cancer UK for about 13 years, all told. Different iterations of the organisation, different iterations of my role. When I started in 2009, it was a small organisation with about 9 people, and I was a communications officer. Over the years, number of mergers, number of different roles. I became head of digital and then director of transformation and technology more recently. And so that big chunk of time for about a decade, from 2012 onwards, when it was Prostate Cancer UK, until when I left at the end of last year, I was responsible for looking at how technology works. So all the digital stuff, as you would expect, websites, email marketing, digital marketing. We were the first to introduce Facebook advertising. Was exciting things a long time ago, feels like. So then going into more broadly strategic use of technology across the organization. And then you start pulling a few threads and you realize that technology isn't anything without people. And so you start to look at how people work. And that's where the broader transformation stuff came in as well. So Prostate Cancer UK grew massively during that time. So like I say, when I joined, it was 9 people. And Jack, I can see you there. You might be able to confirm this. It's something like around 200 people now, right? So it's gone through quite a big change in that time. And I feel like I've seen quite a lot of changes as well during that time. And we tried a lot of things, and some of those things worked really well. Quite a lot of them, I have to admit, that I tried didn't work so well. And so hopefully can share some of that with you today, particularly about agile.
Thanks, Gareth. Can't wait to hear about all of your experience there. I know you've kind of touched on it already, but what was it that got you interested and excited about embedding agile ways of working specifically? You were saying your remit was quite broad in terms of thinking about the actual technology as well as lots of other aspects. What were some of the things that you were seeing that made you think actually a big part of what I need to do in my director role is actively start embedding agile ways of working at Prostate Cancer UK?
Yeah, it was about, so you start with, I started with the technology. That's where my approach came from. So head of digital, you trying to build websites and new products and services for your users and supporters, and then going into that broader technology thing. And you start to see things which need changing, and you pull a few threads and you realize that, you know, the technology, lo and behold, isn't the most important thing in all of this. Like the people using it are the most important thing, and how they work together. And I was starting to see the systems of which we are almost, actually we're not taught, are we? So most of us are taught to work through the systems of work we're brought up in. No one, like I've never been to business school, for instance. I'm not sure if many people on this call have, but it doesn't feel like we're sort of taught to work. You're just you're given a job and then you learn how to work through it. And those are the systems that you grow up in. And most of those systems are quite linear, in like an industrialized approach almost to the structure of work in functions. And that's quite often, that means that, like when I say industrialized, it's kind of, people know what the end, well, in this model, people know what the end product is going to be. Management plan that work out for the workers to do. The workers do their part of it and move it on to the next part of that process for it to be done by somebody else until the whole thing is done. And the emphasis is on efficiency and sort of controlling that process. And the structures in our organization often reflect this at times. And this is, bear in mind, this isn't talking about Prostate Cancer UK now, it's talking about my experience with Prostate Cancer UK then. We were very structured in we had a comms team, we had a fundraising team, we had a services team, we had a research team, and quite often in campaigns particularly, and this was my experience in days of head of digital, is in campaigns, it'd be like digital team does their bit, they pass it on to the marketing team, or the other way around quite often, actually digital team is often at the end. But yeah, the campaign team does their bit, they pass it on to the marketing team, pass it on to the fundraising team. Like it wasn't collected together, it was kind of this process of moving it forward. And I was not sure if that was the only thing which made things not suboptimal, let's call it, but I felt like there was a better way of collaborating for all of that. And I noticed this in the way that we were working, because we were seeing great results. Prostate Cancer UK had huge growth and change during that time, but I could see there was frustrations in the way people were working together. And so I started to look at how teams work, particularly if you're trying to fix things, then it's often about the teams. And if you're interested in ways to make things meaningful, enjoyable for people, I honestly believe that in charity sector, because there's not a lot of money to throw around, the biggest asset is the people in an organization. There is so much passion, drive, creativity, enthusiasm. It's incredible. That is the main power of the charity sector, I believe. And we're not always set up in ways to help work that. So that's why I got interested in thinking about how the team works, how to make things more meaningful and enjoyable for people, because let's be honest, it's not money which draws people to the charity sector. No one's getting rich working for charities. This is about something you believe in and you care about. So it should be enjoyable as well. And also we start to think about what does the end user think in all of this? How do we bring that into it before it's too late in the process? And also getting to the end of projects and realizing, oh, we got that wrong. Whereas if we'd have thought about this a bit sooner, we might have been a bit better. And that's when I started to look at other ways to do things. And really, that's when I started to think about agile. I've been exposed to agile quite a lot through my time as head of digital, working with digital agencies, working on digital products. And software development is complicated. There's lots can go wrong with software development. You don't know exactly what's going to happen. It's also really expensive. And so I saw how agile ways of working were helping to deliver complex, costly projects that were full of uncertainty. And I thought, well, if agile can help with that, then surely it can be applied to other non-software things too. And this is a common thought. A lot of people go through this. I'm not saying I've invented this way of thinking about it at all. That was my experience of going through it. And then so we start to investigate what agile is about. Talk to a few people, read a few blog posts, watch a few webinars, attend a few workshops, start to talk around it. And it starts to make sense that how you can start to bring it into an organization, and how if you manage that, then it might make a big difference. And that's a difference to the end results, different to the end users, difference to the customers and supporters and beneficiaries, and difference to how teams work. So that's kind of how I got interested in wanting to bring agile in. And I kind of learned the hard way about how what works and what doesn't, into making things stick a little bit.
Thank you. So it sounds like you were noticing that the way the current structures weren't enabling you to deliver the best outcomes to the end user, and you notice opportunities for staff to be enjoying work and being more productive along the way.
Yeah, if I'm honest, it was a hunch rather than like a certainty.
Yeah, okay. And then you started looking around, started thinking, yeah, agile, it feels like it could be the right approach to start to apply to unlock some of this value that you could see. And at what point did you start to think about the role of influencing leadership to enable that?
Well, it's about your sphere of control, I guess. So when I was head of digital, I was blessed with great leaders supporting me and around me who gave me a lot of autonomy with what I did. So within my team, I was able to bring in sort of some agile approaches and some agile ways of working. That was fine when head of digital, but that can kind of go so far. And maybe actually, given a different manager, I might have needed to influence more to be able to allow me to try some things with agile there, or just use it. But I think because it's so closely associated with sort of software development, that was kind of a fairly straightforward thing for people to grasp. When you're thinking about how it gets outside of that, then you need to start thinking about how you convince other people to make that work. And it's changing the way people have done things, and it is an investment in time and probably some money as well. So you're going to need to start influencing around that, because there's people don't do things because you tell them. People do things because they want to do them.
So you noticed there was an opportunity. You noticed it would be a lot of work involved in creating the change that you wanted to see, but I'm imagining you had some benefits that you identified that Prostate Cancer UK would get from embedding agile ways of working.
Yeah, and those benefits I think were really important, because any sort of change work, any sort of influencing work is hard. It will takes time to build those relationships with people and to convince them to do things, and then to prove it, and to keep proving it, and then keep convincing. So I had to be quite clear for my own sanity, really, about like what the benefits were. Why is it worth the effort? Why bother making anything different? Like, you've got to have a clear goal as to what that is, and that clear goal doesn't need to be a specific set of outputs or desired state. But for me, there was sort of three main areas I wanted to bring in to the organization that I thought would benefit lots of different things. So a more human-centered approach to work, I think, was one of the main things. So bringing that voice of the user more. We were seeing regularly people talking about putting the customer at the heart of everything they do, and getting some great insights, some great research, but not knowing how to put it into practice. We weren't shown the methods and the tools of how to do that. And I thought, well, Agile can play a part in this potentially. Also a good way of getting more information, but also thinking about, so that's the sort of the external user side of things, but also thinking about how groups of people work together, giving them tools to analyze and improve their work, giving them autonomy, purpose, ownership, and emphasis on collaboration as the way to deliver good work towards an agreed outcome, rather than the set of outputs. There's very much that people over process side of things, because I've seen it, and I'm sure many people here will have seen it, or maybe seeing it right now in their work. You get great, bright people coming through who really want to make a difference. They come up against too much treacle, let's call it, like it makes it difficult for them to move things forward. They get frustrated, or maybe they're not engaged or empowered in the work they do, and they move on. And that's a loss to the organization. Maybe they leave the charity sector. That's a loss to the sector. And for me, that's a loss, for the good of the world. So I think part of it was trying to think about how we make people more empowered and happy in their work, as well as delivering great outcomes. So it's like, that's why I mean, like, a more human-centered approach to work. Second one is kind of more flexibility and adaptability. I don't know how many times everyone here has written a Gantt chart with a plan on it, and then, or seen one, and then first day or first week of that project realized the whole thing's wrong. But you don't really talk about it, you just carry on and sort of deliver it anyway. And I'm a big believer in planning, actually. I think planning is really important, but you've got to do it in a way which is realistic and honest. Because oftentimes, if you are putting together a plan that says that you're going to do exactly these things over the next 3 years, 2 years, even 6 months, then it's going to need to change. You need a way of being able to flex and change with that, and being able to adapt to it. Because also, apart from what you can control, there's so much you can't control. Like, there's, the way people react to it, the fundraising levels might change, or it might be a new piece of legislation, or there might be, a pandemic. There's all sorts of things which can change. So you need to be able to adapt and be flexible. And I thought, well, maybe Agile can help with that too. And the third one, and there are lots of other things, but the third one for me is about transparency and accountability. I think people do their best work when they're out in the open, when they are proud of the work they're doing, and it's there for everyone to see. I think that means that people aren't, if there's there's lots of things about this. You need to have a psychological safety and an environment where it's okay to fail and learn from it. But once you have that, then things don't get hidden. Like, you don't have to like do an investigation into why a project hasn't worked and then dig into it and find out, well, because someone was really scared about owning up to this thing that happened that was not their fault, but they did feel it was their fault, and that kind of thing. And I think like Agile can help with that transparency and accountability, and it helps people understand as an organization what the organization is doing. Like, most projects end up being, in my experience, being fairly cross-organizational. Like, there are very few projects which can be done entirely within one team. Certainly not massively meaningful projects, because you need to get at least the finance team involved to pay for it, right? So it needs to be some way of cross-organizational collaboration, and that's where that sort of transparency and accountability can help with that. And I think, actually, if you think about, like, but with those three things in mind, human-centered approach, more flexibility and adaptability, more transparency and accountability, the default approaches of how people run projects in organizations, if you've grown up through the way most organizations do things, they don't really allow for that in general. So that's why I've thought, again, maybe there's something in this Agile thing that can help with that, particularly looking at creating more meaningful change, which could become complex and needs to get people involved in.
So you're at the place then when you're clear, you can see some clear benefits that embedding agile ways of working would have on these three particular areas that you identified about: a more human-centered approach, more flexibility and adaptability, and more transparency and accountability. Could you take us on a sort of whistle-stop tour of how you went from that belief that embedding agile ways of working would be beneficial to Prostate Cancer UK? What were some of the steps that you took on the way to starting to embed it?
Well, I'll tell you the steps I got wrong first, and I'll tell you some of the things that. So I think so. In my role as head of digital around 2016, 17, around that sort of time, we were starting to think, oh, there's definitely something to do with agile. I think one of the mistakes I made there was that I didn't know enough about it myself. And so I just thought, agile seems cool. Let's try that. I've seen it work elsewhere. It must be easiest to bring that in. So I didn't really know enough about it myself. So I should have got myself involved in it and got myself working in it more to understand the ins and outs of it. I think overall, once you start trying to bring something in like this, you'll become the face of it. And so you need to be able to answer questions as to how it's going to work, or at least say, I know who to ask to answer that question. So I think like being the face of it, understanding, like, you need to understand it a bit more. Second was, I thought that just training courses would do it. So we brought in some different training courses. We've had a couple of people just go on, sent them away to training courses, and we did a couple of cross-organizational, like big training sessions to get them introduced to the theory of agile, which were really well attended, and people loved them and never spoke of them afterwards. Like, they just sort of happened, people went through them, it was good, no one used them again. And so I learned from that a training course on its own isn't enough. So then fast forward to 2018, 19, got a new role as director of technology, or associate director of technology at the time, actually. And I was thinking, well, I've learned more about agile during that time, spoken to a few more people, understand where it was in other organizations, and thought, well, okay, now I understand that there needs to be a bit more of a something you need to do it to learn it, and you need to continue doing it. So I was looking for a project, and looking for a project that would happily take on a different approach. And someone approached me to do with a technology thing. Can you help us with a technology thing? I said, sure, we can help with that. How do you feel about taking a different approach to how the project is run? And so it was a little known fundraising product at the time called March the Month, a little virtual step challenge. And we said, well, let's work with Sarah Evans at the time, who Jack, I can see on the call, he works with now. And we said, well, can we take an agile product approach to some of this? Not purely, like just a few little bits. Can we try those things? And so we took it from a £30,000 project, £30,000 product, to I think £100,000, the next iteration of it. So it's quite a big leap. And we picked that because Sarah was really up for it, the team were up for it. We thought there's room for improvement here. We made some sort of conditions about doing it so we would work out in the open. So we literally did that, and we had took over our main breakout area and put post-it notes everywhere, and got people involved in lots of different sessions. So we could start to get a bit of buzz, so people could see we were working on it. People saw the results. People were talking about it, saying, "Oh, that thing you're doing," and luckily for us, I don't think it's lucky for us. I think it's just a natural way of these things, is that people are saying, "Oh, I like this new way of working. It's difficult in these areas, but actually really helps." So we're proving to people that you can use agile to help people get better results, and also work in a more work in a different way, which is more enjoyable. So that started to then build momentum. We tried a few other projects. So I wasn't, in fact, looking for more projects, and projects were coming to us, and we're having to sort of choose which projects could then use more of an agile approach and product approach. And eventually that sort of built momentum to the point we were starting to realize as an organization that it was going to work for us. From that point on, we managed to secure funding for a role to help embed this in, because actually after a while it becomes part teaching, part coaching. parts of troubleshooting and influencing. So we got an agile delivery lead role into the organization, and that took me about 3 attempts to recruit. Found it really difficult to recruit somebody because we're effectively looking for an agile coach. Agile coaches are expensive, and so like you had to find a way of making that work, and we kind of landed on a good way of doing that in the end. Really proud of what we did there. And then working with the chief executive and the director of HR at the time, we started to build this program of top-down and bottom-up approaches to adopting agile. So we're kind of looking at how does it work for us, like where can it be applied, looking for other projects, kind of say, all right, we've tried it in this fundraising product development a bit, what can we do with research? I know like the research team at Prostate Cancer UK, a few of them have really latched onto it as well as a good way of working. So you start to sort of put it into the organization that way, and you've got your leadership sessions, so trying to understand what agile means from a leadership point of view. We had sessions every sort of, I think it was 5 weeks we agreed on the cadence, which was great, and understanding like it's a very different way of leading agile. It's very different things that you have to approach, and like that, giving a time for all the leadership team to get together and talk about what that meant, but also making sure there was lots of on the ground work happening. So yeah, I'm really glad to see, again, calling you out again, Jack, sorry about this, but really glad to see, you know, Jack and his teams were really engaged in trying it out and flexing it and pushing it to the boundaries a little bit about, you know, does it work when we do this, or how do we add these bits into it? So that was kind of, we ended up when I left with, I guess about at least half the organization had been exposed to what agile meant, and most people had worked in some form of agile way. We were like not very prescriptive about it, must be this, must be that, but like just bringing those things in. So yeah, that was kind of the potted history of introducing agile.
Thanks, Gareth. That definitely chimes with what we see works really well in multiple other charities, is identifying a really specific place to start, to work out in the open, show the benefits, also get people confident working differently, and then often the momentum can build from there. It's also great to hear you talking about both taking that bottom-up approach, but also taking a top-down approach with leadership. And there must have been lots of influencing involved, not only to get, for example, funding for this sort of cross-organizational agile coach role, but also to get the whole leadership team, for example, to give up, was it 90 minutes, 2 hours of their time every 5 weeks to engage with the idea of agile leadership. Just to name a few of the things that you needed to influence to get off the ground. What were some of the things that you were considering, or that others should consider when they identify that they really need to start influencing people in positions of leadership to get the kind of buy-in that you did?
So I think there will come a point where you'll need to influence some form of leadership to make a change towards adopting a more agile approach. And that might be your direct line manager, it might be a peer of yours, it might be the chief executive, whoever it is. You're going to have to make some sort of appeal to them to help them embrace the change, because without that it won't happen. It's not as simple as just doing a training course. People are going to have to change the way they work, and that has knock-on effects for things, and you know, there may be a drop in productivity during that time. So you know, there's going to need to be some influencing along that path. And there are some things which, you know, it's not just agile, you can apply this to anything, but just considering, try and empathize with who you're trying to influence, right? So if you think about leadership in most charities, I'm talking about chief executive, directors, heads, managers, any form of leadership, or even in fact nobody in like people who aren't in a structural form of leadership, but more maybe in a disciplined form of leadership, so that they are the lead on that particular discipline. Most leaders will want to know the effort of something new and the benefit of doing it. That's the first thing I always come up with, is like, what is it going to actually cost in terms of time and money and brain power, and what's the benefit of doing it. So having an idea of what those benefits are, so you can constantly make that case and try and understand like what it is from their point of view is going to most appeal to them. Some leaders will be mostly into the time aspect of it. Some leaders will be mostly into the money aspect of it. Whatever it is that's like going to float their boat, think about what it is and what the benefits are to them. In relation to agile, like most leaders won't have experienced working in an agile way before. I think that's fairly safe to say. I come from a generation of heads of digital from 10 years ago who are becoming directors now. But even heads of digital from 10 years ago, not all were using agile, I would say. And it's really only become like the last 5 years that I guess momentum's been building about using agile in the charity sector for something other than software development. And that's what I'm really talking about here, is because most charities don't produce software, right? Most charities don't do that. And so you're thinking about agile in a non-software development context for this. Because that is kind of new ground in a lot of ways, which makes it exciting, but also you've got to think through it. So most leaders won't have been on an agile project or anything like that before. So they might have been working the same way for 20 odd years. So why have they got to change? There might be a lot of preconceptions about what agile is. They might have heard about it as being like this thing that software, you do in software, or they might have heard some disasters, because there were loads of them about how agile wasn't done very well, or how it like there wasn't a good result at the end of it, or wasted lots of time. They might have heard leaders talk to each other is the other thing. Yes. They will talk and they will hear about their experiences from other organizations. So you might have to deal with some of those preconceptions yourself. So bear that in mind. Every leader, like every person in most charities, most people in most charities, put it that way, has a lot on their plate. So the risk of something going wrong or time being wasted is quite a big worry for a lot of people. And so you're going to have to actually, I found that agile helps to manage that risk. And that's one way of getting that across. But you've always got to think about, there's so much on their plate. Can they afford to do anything different? Can they even, often I think about a really fast train. An organization is often a very fast train with lots of people going in the same direction. And you might have noticed this yourself. If you go on a holiday for maybe 2 weeks, you step off the train and you come back and it's like, oh my God, trying to get back onto it can take a little time to start jogging along and then running again, then you're back into the rhythm of it. But there's a lot going on. The other thing is that some leaders really care about the detail of how things are done. Some people call it micromanagement, some people just call it attention to detail. Whatever it is, some people really want to know the ins and outs of things. Some leaders do not care at all. They cannot even see detail. And you've got to kind of figure out which realm your leaders are in for that, because that will then tell you how to sort of make your case appeal to them. So yeah, I think those are the things that like to bear in mind whenever thinking about trying to influence any sort of leadership, is always trying to get into their perspective first. And then there are some specifics around influencing agile approaches, which I can come on to next.
Brilliant, really important context there to bear in mind when it comes to sort of do some thinking around before you just jump straight in, popping time in with people and starting your sort of hard influencing. I know we've talked ahead of today about your top 5 tips for influencing, and I'm wondering if you could run us through those now. Yeah, just to give us a sense of what are the top 5 things that you've learned through influencing leaders along the way, because it'd be great. Yeah, and maybe I'll quiz you for some stories around each as you go.
Okay, well, yeah, gets the headline of the session. So these aren't in particular order, but we'll just call them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 as they come up. So first of all, I think it's about building your evidence and learning through doing. So like I said, you need to be this expert in agile and what it can mean for your organization. It's a learned skill, agile. It's a learned skill that needs practice. So it needs something, you need to do it in order to understand it, I think. And you won't know, and your context in your organization will be different to most other organizations. You've probably got a marketing department, you've probably got a fundraising department, you've probably got a people and resources department, but how those things work is going to be really different across different organizations. So you're going to have to figure out how it works for your context, and you won't know that until you try something. So I think finding that sort of pilot project that helps build your evidence, find a little low risk pilot project, start small, definitely always start small. Or maybe it's something that is in crisis, needs to shake up. You know, if there's a team or a project which we just hit rock bottom, then you can help them for a start, is a good thing. But also, like, they're more likely to want to try something new because they've tried everything else so far sometimes. So find something small, something that's a bit of crisis, find a little pilot project. Maybe it's low risk, or maybe it's just there's no risk left in it, and sort of build your evidence for how agile works in your organization, and how it can work for you. I think it's really important to get someone who's done it before to help guide you a little bit. So I worked with some great people outside of the organization over the years. Eleanor and Julia are definitely two I would recommend with Tilt. They were excellent in helping us figure stuff out. But I should also give shout outs to Manifesto, as it was then. We did some great sessions with them. And Emily Webber is also great. You might have seen her talking about communities practice, particularly really excellent. Like, there are some wonderful people doing wonderful things with agile that can help you understand how to apply it in your context. I can do that as well, by the way. So if you want to, you know, I'm also around. So get them to help you, guide you through a little bit, because it will be new, and it doesn't mean they need to run it for you, just giving a little bit of guidance. Then document everything, gather feedback, get results, work out in the open, make it like a thing which people notice. Never do this in secret. Like, people need to see it, because it's some of the seeing is believing stuff. This is quite theoretical a lot of the time. You're talking about, you know, management structures and how people work together. It doesn't make sense until people see it in action. And so you've got to have that sort of evidence for how it works, learn through doing it. So I think that's probably the first side of things. Then once you've got that, the second one is telling a story and repeating it over and over again. So get your story straight. And use the language of your organization to make that case. So what gets noticed around your place? For me at the time, we were at Prostate Cancer UK at the time, we were talking a lot about engagement. We brought in a new engagement strategy. And I felt that Agile had a real part to play in that engagement approach, bringing a closer understanding of the user into projects, being able to adapt to their needs. So I use that language unashamedly, I would say, in order to get it across. But I wasn't telling lies. This is truth. Just using the language of what gets noticed. That's part of my story. Matching it to strategies and missions. You know, what is the point of changing anything? What are you trying to get across? Why should you bother doing anything? And that is like the part of that story. You can make that story practical wherever possible, and wherever possible, show is better than tell. So I said tell a story, but you should tell that story through showing things. Show that difference. It's not just about. I've got lots of slides which I don't use anymore, which are fairly redundant. I've figured out they don't work, which are diagrams about this process goes to that bit, goes to this bit. This is what this means, like boxes on the screen. Lovely, beautiful slides. And I sometimes might just go and look at them again to see how these beautiful slides are made, but they don't tell the story. The story is we took a fundraising product from £30,000 to £100,000, and all we did was change the way we worked. That's the story, right? That's how people get noticed in this stuff. I think keep it simple.
So that was the story that you were telling within Prostate Cancer UK. It wasn't sort of here's how it works in theory. It was here's a story of success and how agile ways of working enabled that. Yeah,
because that's the thing that matters, right? That's the bit you're trying to. That's the point of doing all of this. So yeah, that's probably the second point I'd make. And yeah, that story is still going on a little bit, I think. You know, really proud to see that some of the fundraising products which we started out in this way of working, this agile way of working, have reached the massive top 25 this year, which is a huge achievement for the team. You know, Prostate Cancer UK was never anywhere near that top 25 before. For people who don't know, that's the top 25 fundraising events across the sector, as an organisation called Massive that look at that. So yeah, that story is definitely part of it.
And that overlays with something that certainly Julia and I have learned the hard way, is that not only actually talking too much about the theory ahead of time can actively get in the way of success. it can sometimes lead to fear, or agile ways of working feeling like something quite complex and theoretical. So there's a really compelling case, we believe, for doing exactly what you did there, Gareth, talking about stories, talking about showing, not telling, because the telling can sometimes scupper you.
And I should say as well, like all this experience of Prostate Cancer UK of influencing it, I'm seeing that in other organisations too that I'm working with now. I'm not at the point, because so early in my consulting career, not at the point of being able to see that long-term benefit, but I'm seeing a lot of similarities with this. So hopefully these tips can apply to other organisations as well. I think the third one is about, you need to influence at lots of different levels. So we're talking about leadership team, and that might be your chief executive, it might be your directors, it might be your associate or assistant directors, it might be your heads, but also you do need to influence the team to do it as well. They've got to want to do it. So it's all about understanding that other person's needs, and it will be different for different levels of different teams, what they need. Some people will feel threatened. So from a leadership perspective, it changes their role in agile projects. They're no longer telling people what to do, they're getting out of the way and helping them do things. And for some people, they can find that a little bit unsettling. So you've got to try and work with them and help them to understand that they've got a more important role now, actually. The role of giving your team everything they need to deliver the best way they can is far more important than telling them what to do. So helping people to understand that and bring them along on that is really important. And I think you just got to keep working to those. So it's influencing, not you constantly influence rather than influencing once. So it's like that, telling the story again and again, but also making those probably personal relationships with people, so you can understand what their needs are and what their concerns are, so you can just help them through that. To help you with all of that, my fourth point is about finding your advocates and community of agile change makers. So I was very fortunate at Prostate Cancer UK. When we started this work, we had great support from Angela, who was the chief executive at the time, and Sue, who was the director of HR at the time, really supportive of the work we've done so far and keen to help embed that into the organisation. So they were great advocates for this, but also had advocates across the rest of the leadership team, and advocates in our heads of department, and then advocates in teams that had done it. So you've got people who can tell the story for you, who are interested in telling that story, and that different range of people makes it an organizational story rather than Gareth reckons we should do agile. It's about people understanding what it means for them and telling that story for you. In fact, I was never happier than when somebody else said what I was going to say about something. That's how that story becomes an organizational story, rather than just a pet project. And you'll need to build this community of people who understand what you're trying to do. So you're never going to, this comes in part my last point, but you're never going to get all the people on board. Like, just face that, right? So that's the first thing to understand, is that you'll never get 100% of the people 100% of the time. And that comes part of my last point. But what's important about this sort of finding your advocates and your community of agile change makers is that you'll need help at times to rant to. You'll need help at times to help unload your struggles with this, because it will get frustrating. You'll be telling people the same thing over and over again, and sometimes they will get annoyed with you, sometimes they'll get frustrated with you, and sometimes they'll be sniping about you. This kind of thing will happen because you're trying to make change happen. So having a community of people who you can talk to and celebrate success with, go, yeah, it's great, we got that. Oh, have you seen the change in this person's mood since we started talking about? That's really important, because it helps you believe it, but also reinforces this community of things happening together. So look for your community internally, and that's people who've gone through it and who are advocates, but also like this community of people we've got on this call here. And like, I know Tilt have a wider agile leaders community. It's really important to understand how other people are doing things, and you can share your experiences as well, because that makes everyone better. But also just good to unload, because it can be a big emotional and intellectual drain you're going to need energy to do this, and having people around you can help that.
Having that, yeah, so having a group of people that you can celebrate with and or commiserate with, we found to be really transformational, because as you said, Gareth, a lot of the work that you were doing and that we're doing as a community is quite countercultural, and so you are going to bump up against lots of challenges, lots of blank walls, as well as sometimes some sort of more active barriers and some people who don't want to see the change that you're trying to drive happening. Julie's going to pop a link to the Charity Agile Leaders Club in the chat, which I know some of you are part of, and that's a free monthly to 6 weeks-ish get together online of folks like us talking about this work together. So that's another great space that you can use for people externally who are doing this work of embedding agile ways of working, to share ideas and support and celebrate those wins, as well as kind of regather momentum for the challenges as and when they come. But also, as you said, Gareth, great and important to have those people inside your organisation as well. Thanks for sharing those 5 tips.
So I've got one more.
Oh, yeah.
It's the last one, which is about being pragmatic and flexible.
Yes.
So I've kind of hinted at it before, but this isn't going to go exactly as you plan. Like, you don't get too attached to exact aspects of how you think it's going to be, and it's going to change, and it won't be neat and tidy. It won't be like nicely plotted out. That is fine. And actually, it's a very agile way of thinking about it, right? It's about direction of travel. We kept one of the mantras we came up with a lot of the times at Prostate Cancer UK was progress over perfection. Just keep on saying that, we're moving forward with things are improving. We're not trying to perfect the whole thing, because it should be an evolving thing. It shouldn't be static. It should be definite. It should be like where you're trying to go towards. And that sometimes to do that, you need to go where the energy is, and not worry about where the energy isn't. So that's what about being practical and flexible, kind of make progress happen. Sometimes you will have to tackle the hard things sometimes, but if there's more impact to be made by putting your energies elsewhere, then go with that, I would say. You need to have a very broad view of what agile can mean for your organization, because you probably don't know what it is at this stage. So you need to be aware and comfortable with the fact that you're going to define it as you go along and learn together, and that'll make it more solid, right? You'll embed more behaviors that way, and you might have to let go of some principles and long-held beliefs about agile ways of working. I think when I started on this, I was definitely more in the mindset of, well, you need to be doing certain things, like, so, and teams, need to be doing certain things. Maybe they need to be doing stand-ups. They need to do stand-ups in a certain way, or maybe they need to be doing retrospectives and doing them in a certain way. And actually, you learn that it doesn't matter too much. It's about, like, that mindset and what is good for the team and that group of people, how they do it. And you need to provide a flexible framework rather than frameworks and guide rails, I would say, rather than sort of rules and processes for people to go along with.